As the Upper Paleolithic age slowly gave way to the Mesolithic and early Neolithic, small groups of hunters and traveling craftspeople began to form larger, more stable communities, groups we might now think of as early tribes or clans. In the highlands of southeastern Turkey and the northern Fertile Crescent, along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, these early societies started to take shape. It was in this landscape of rocky plains and fertile valleys that humans first began to create symbolic systems, ways of expressing meaning, identity, and belief through art and design. Around 10,000 BCE, several sites appeared across this region, filled with carvings and symbols that mark the earliest evidence of organized spiritual life, the beginnings of what we might now call culture. Among all these places, one stood out. On a limestone hilltop, about 15 kilometers northeast of modern Şanlıurfa, a group of hunter-gatherers chose a barren and windy plateau to build something extraordinary. They began quarrying and shaping huge stone pillars, some taller than a person, others so heavy that it would take many people to move them. These T-shaped monoliths were arranged in great circular enclosures. Skilled craftspeople, flint workers, stone carvers, and tool makers traveled from distant places to take part. Even though the site was too harsh for farming or living, it became a center for gathering and exchange, where people shared tools, ideas, and artistic techniques. Inside these circles of stone, humans and animals were carved side by side with abstract shapes, creating a new visual language that expressed how early people saw themselves and the world around them. This was Göbekli Tepe, meaning the belly hill or navel hill of Turkey. What shocked archaeologists most was how complete and sophisticated the site's oldest enclosure was from the start. Unlike later monuments such as Stonehenge, which evolved over generations, Göbekli Tepe's Enclosure D was finished as a unified, complex design. 12 enormous pillars, some over 5 meters tall, were carefully positioned in a perfect circle, facing inward like the spokes of a wheel. Radiocarbon dating showed it was built around 9,700 BCE, making it the oldest known monumental structure in the world, built long before farming, metal, or writing existed. Strangely, the later enclosures were smaller and less refined, as if the art and craftsmanship had declined over time, an unexpected reversal of what we usually see in ancient architecture. To understand how such a remarkable site came to be, we have to look at other nearby communities from the same period. About 90 kilometers southwest, along the Euphrates River, the settlement of Cerf El Ahmar was being built. There, people were beginning to settle down rather than move constantly. In the center of that village stood a large, round, mud brick building, 3 times bigger than any nearby home. Inside, it was divided into small compartments, with wooden pillars and walls decorated with patterns that looked like woven textiles. Nearby, auroch wild cattle skulls were built into the walls, hinting at early ritual practices. The repeating zigzag lines and animal symbols at Cerf El Ahmar would later appear again, refined and magnified, in the carvings of Göbekli Tepe. Further north, at Tel Karamel, archaeologists discovered another early communal complex. Huge stone towers, 6 meters wide, were built with crescent-shaped benches and hearths that burned for centuries. These fires weren't just for warmth, they were part of ritual gatherings, showing that fire had sacred meaning in community life. Even hundreds of kilometers away, in Wadi Faynan, southern Jordan, similar semi-subterranean buildings appeared. Their snake-like lines, massive stone mortars, and decorated tools suggest that feasting, craftwork, and ceremony were deeply connected, and that these early people were part of wider networks of exchange, not isolated groups. All of this evidence points to one clear truth. Göbekli Tepe did not appear out of nowhere. It was the peak of a cultural evolution that had been unfolding across the Fertile Crescent for centuries. Its beauty, scale, and symbolic depth reflect the creativity of people living through a time of great environmental change, the Younger Dryas, a sudden cold and dry period that reshaped how humans lived. These people weren't simply struggling to survive, they were finding new ways to come together, to create meaning, to express shared beliefs, and to build spaces that bound them as communities. In this light, Göbekli Tepe was never a village. It was a gathering place, a sacred meeting ground where early humans came to celebrate, to remember, and to connect. Its pillars, carvings, and circles were not homes, but symbols, a declaration that humans could shape both the physical world and the world of ideas. Here, for the first time in history, people turned stone into story, turning belief itself into architecture. Imagine, if you will, being granted the extraordinary privilege of stepping freely among the enclosures of Göbekli Tepe. We descend cautiously down a ladder, then another, until our feet touch the floor of Enclosure D, the earliest and most elaborately decorated of these sanctuaries. Sunlight slants across the limestone, revealing every incision, every curve, every shadowed relief. Animals, abstract symbols, and towering anthropomorphic pillars emerge in the shifting light, their presence both haunting and commanding. At the heart of this egg-shaped space rise two monumental T-pillars, its unmistakable focal points, but our exploration begins at the edge. Pillar 22 stands before us, abstractly human, featureless, yet unmistakably corporeal. A snake and a fox ripple across its face in delicate relief. Moving clockwise, Pillar 21 presents a gazelle, a wild ass, and a creature we cannot readily name. On Pillar 20, wild cattle, a leaping fox, and a lizard appear, each line carved with studied intent. Pillars 26 and 28 display boars poised along their inward edges, frozen in motion, yet alive within the stone. The animals here are not domesticated, they are the quarry of hunters. Boars, foxes, gazelles, ducks, creatures of the chase, speak to a people deeply bound to the rhythms of the hunt. Tens of thousands of fractured and marked bones unearthed from the site attest to communal feasts and ritual gatherings centered on this primal act. Yet among these familiar forms appear more dangerous beings, snakes, scorpions, spiders. Their presence gestures toward a realm beyond sustenance, toward myth, danger, and the sacred. At the southwestern edge, Pillar 33 commands attention. Cranes march across its capstone, their long necks carved with fluid precision. At the base, the enigmatic H symbol appears, neither letter nor ornament, but a deliberate sign whose meaning is now lost. Around it, serpents coil and weave, guiding the eye along the narrow edge, while a six-legged spider asserts itself within this ritual tableau. Then rises Pillar 43, the famed vulture stone, the zenith of symbolic expression. A goose-like bird supports a headless, phallic human figure. A scorpion crouches below. Serpents, cranes, boars, and geometric motifs interlace the surface in a dense choreography of meaning. Every relief feels purposeful, every form a fragment of an ancient cosmology rendered in stone. At the center stand the two tallest pillars, 18 and 31, like sentinels presiding over the circle. Carved arms run down their narrow edges, confirming their human essence. Pillar 31 bears a necklace formed from a bucranium and a belt adorned with crescents and H symbols. Pillar 18 wears an even richer ensemble, an H symbol pendant, a circumpunct, a crescent, and a belt clasped with intertwined serpents. Fox pelts hang from their waists, and living foxes are etched in the crooks of their arms. These adornments speak of mythic beings or divine intermediaries, figures of power and reverence. Across Enclosure D, snakes dominate, 25 in total, followed by foxes, ducks, cranes, and aurochs. Boars, wild sheep, Asiatic asses, gazelles, vultures, geese, scorpions, spiders, and great cats complete the menagerie. Alongside them, abstract signs, the H symbol, circumpunct, and crescent, compose a separate pictorial language. One silent now, yet unmistakably deliberate, carrying meanings that once bound a people, their rituals, and their gods. Walking among these T-pillars feels like turning the pages of a stone picture book. Each carving tells a story about the beliefs and imagination of a society standing at the very beginning of the Neolithic age. The size of these stones, their carving, transport, and careful placement reveals something extraordinary. People were working together on a scale that shows a new kind of shared purpose. Here, in this limestone sanctuary, the minds of hunter-gatherers began to change. Ritual, community, myth, and art came together to form a new way of seeing the world and themselves. Though these pillars were later buried, they still speak clearly across 11,000 years. Their carvings remain sharp, their forms bold, their arrangement precise. Göbekli Tepe feels almost modern in its vision. It is not just an ancient site. It is a threshold into deep time, a place where we can sense the birth of culture and belief long before cities, writing, or organized religion. These carvings record how humans began to see themselves as part of something larger, how they used stone to carry their identity, history, and shared life forward through time. At the heart of the grandest enclosure stands Pillar 18, a massive, T-shaped figure. It's easy to think of it as a god, but its meaning may be more human and closer to home. Look at the fox held in the crook of its arm. Thousands of years before Göbekli Tepe, a grave in Jordan revealed a person buried with a fox companion. Taming a wild fox required great patience and skill, qualities deeply respected among hunter-gatherers. Over generations, the memory of such a person could have grown into legend. The fox master might have become an honored ancestor, a figure remembered not as divine, but as a model of human excellence. In this light, the great T-pillars may not have been gods at all, but ancestors, human figures raised to monumental scale. Building them was a tribute to those who came before, to the founders of their world. The symbols carved on these stone ancestors were not decorations, but signs of identity, a kind of early emblem for clans or groups. On Pillar 18, the belt tells such a story. Snakes twist across many pillars, not just for their shape, but for their motion. A snake's winding movement echoed the path of a thread passing through a loom. Weaving, a vital new skill, allowed people to make nets, baskets, and cloth. It was a craft that bound their lives together. One pillar even shows a carved net pattern held by weights shaped like snake heads. The H symbol, seen on Pillar 18's belt, may come from this same idea. Two snake heads joined together. It could have meant alliance, a sign that two great weaving families had united. Other symbols point to different parts of life. The C-shaped mark might have been a trader's sign. Similar shapes appear on stone stamps found far from Göbekli Tepe, perhaps marking goods like obsidian or fine stone tools. The round circumpunct symbol, like a circle with a dot in the middle, probably stood for something central to their way of life. Feasting. Archaeologists have uncovered huge stone troughs that could hold over 150 liters, along with circular stone plates. These weren't for everyday meals, but for great gatherings filled with food and drink, beer or wine brewed for celebration. Such feasts built friendships and shared identity, and the symbol of a bowl or plate may have represented that bond of abundance. We can imagine people arriving from nearby valleys and distant hills, gathering beneath the gaze of their stone ancestors. The pillars wore the signs of their world: the weaver's snake, the trader's mark, the feaster's bowl, the chief's fox. Here they came to celebrate, to tell stories, to honor those who shaped their lives. Under the watchful eyes of the T-pillars, they feasted and remembered. The stories they told were not just myths, they were their history, carved forever into stone. Since Göbekli Tepe was first revealed to the world in the early 2000s, a powerful story has taken hold in the public imagination. Across news articles, documentaries, and the endless echo of the internet, the site is often summed up in a single phrase: the world's oldest temple. It's an idea that's easy to picture, a sacred place where wandering Stone Age people gathered from far and wide to worship, make offerings, and hold ceremonies beneath giant T-shaped pillars rising above the open landscape. This idea makes sense at first glance. There are no signs of ordinary daily life at the site. No hearths where fires once burned, no ovens for baking bread, no pens for animals or fields for crops. The huge stone pillars could never have supported normal roofs. Their carved surfaces covered with animals and strange symbols seemed to serve no practical purpose. The site's remote setting, far from water and farmland, makes it feel like a special place, a space set apart from everyday life. But the story of Göbekli Tepe is not as simple as calling it a temple. The site suggests a much richer picture. The T-pillars, arranged in oval enclosures, may have once supported light roofs. Stone basins, troughs, and channels carved into the bedrock hint that water storage and plant use were part of the site's rhythm. Tools such as sickle blades suggest nearby farming or food processing. The enormous effort needed to raise these stones points to cooperation and shared purpose. The animal carvings also tell a deeper story. The foxes, cranes, vultures, snakes, and boars were likely not random decorations, but represented different social groups or clans, acting as emblems or totems. These carvings may have been a symbolic language, helping people identify who they were and what they belonged to. Take, for example, the famous vulture stone in Enclosure D. The images on this pillar seem to tell a story, perhaps about 3 major families or lineages, each symbolized by its own animal. The bird, the fox, the scorpion, and other figures are part of a social and mythological story about alliances, heritage, and power. In these carvings, everyday life and myth merge, showing a culture where nature, memory, and identity were deeply connected. Perhaps before these stone enclosures were built, there were earlier wooden versions. In those structures, people may have imagined a great bird or totem that united their communities. Through drumming, dancing, and singing, they could have brought the carvings to life, giving power to the stone animals. The enclosure's layout may reflect this social organization. In the earliest enclosure, the tallest pillars rise at the center, decorated with foxes, ducks, and abstract symbols, signaling the gathering of multiple groups. Around them, shorter pillars display snakes, wild cattle, gazelles, and other motifs. Building the enclosures demanded organization, likely giving rise to hierarchies based on expertise and resources. The enclosures were not only places of monumental labor, but also sites of knowledge exchange, craft production, and learning, much like temples or marketplaces in later societies. The site's location at the crossroads of ancient routes across southeastern Turkey and northwest Syria amplified these interactions. Bands, clans, herders, and traders could stop here, exchanging ideas, goods, and expertise. Over millennia, this interaction may have fostered the need for permanent clan houses, enclosed by the T-pillars. Shamans remained influential, but their solitary authority was being supplemented, and eventually overtaken, by an emergent elite. This elite combined craft, trade, administration, and symbolic power, leveraging knowledge of weaving and stoneworking to consolidate wealth and influence. The monumental work was as much a statement of social cohesion and technical mastery as it was of ritual importance. Over generations, this symbolic system spread to neighboring sites such as Nevali Chori, Hamzan Tepe, and Kertik Tepe. At Nevali Chori, sculptures of large birds and human-faced birds continued the visual language of Göbekli Tepe, but in forms suited to domestic or small-scale contexts. Stone vessels, such as those from Göbekli Tepe, carried the same symbolic repertoire. Intricate zigzags, meanders, and lozenges, often combined with animal imagery, became markers of prestige and identity. These portable symbols enabled the dissemination of craft religion practices and served as a form of advertisement for the clan houses, attracting collaborators and allies to the growing network. By the late 10th and early 9th millennia BCE, the ideas and social connections from Göbekli Tepe had grown into a broader culture that spread across nearby settlements, known as the Şanlıurfa cultural horizon. The symbols evolved into new patterns, grids, parallel lines, and V-shapes like those on the Urfa Man statue. With his calm face, tall body, and double V necklace, Urfa Man represents the power and status of the early elite. People skilled in craft, trade, and ritual, whose obsidian eyes attest to the far-reaching trade networks that supported their influence. These networks were practical and economic. Obsidian from central Anatolia, fine tools, and other special goods moved between settlements, helping local leaders strengthen their authority. Communal buildings allowed people to gather for ceremonies and decision-making, connecting communities through shared beliefs, trade, and traditions. By around 7000 BCE, as Göbekli Tepe's last enclosures were built, the hunter-gatherer way of life had climaxed. The social, artistic, and trade systems developed here laid the foundation for the Neolithic Revolution, leading to permanent villages, farming, and herding. This change also brought new problems. The very systems of monuments, rituals, and organized labor that united people eventually became too demanding to sustain. During this time, people relied mostly on hunting and herding. Farming remained experimental. This raises a question. If hunting provided enough food, why turn to the harder work of farming? The answer lies in social and symbolic pressures. Building communal sanctuaries and performing shared rituals required stability and cooperation. These cultural forces encouraged people to settle and cultivate food, not just for survival, but to support their growing social world. Environmental changes also played a part. The Younger Dryas, a colder, drier climate, made wild cereals and animals scarcer, pushing some groups to experiment with planting and animal domestication. While climate alone did not cause agriculture, it was a spark that, combined with human creativity and social needs, gradually turned farming into a way of life. A striking theme of this period is the division of labor. Women carried much of early agriculture's burden, grinding grain, weaving, basket-making, and childcare. These tasks caused physical strain, bone deformities, and shorter lifespans compared to men. Men faced dangers in hunting and herding, but their work was less constant. This shows that agriculture, while bringing stability, had great social and physical costs, especially for women. Ritual and religion were closely tied to power. The skull building at Tayonu, with its human remains and traces of blood, suggests rituals included offerings or sacrifices. Such acts may have helped elites claim divine authority, control labor, and manage community tensions. Wealth and specialized crafts concentrated in the hands of a few, marking the rise of early class divisions. The shift to farming improved the food supply but also increased hardship. People worked harder, families grew larger, and diseases spread more easily. Monumental projects and ritual duties added to the workload. Over time, the cultural benefits of Göbekli Tepe's tradition were likely outweighed by the physical and social costs of sustaining it. The Şanlıurfa Çayonu culture peaked through symbols, crafts, and monumental architecture, uniting people under a serpentine theocracy, a system led by elites using serpent imagery to maintain power. Göbekli Tepe acted as a center for artisans, traders, and ritual specialists, a proto-civilization lasting over 2 millennia. Yet its success carried the seeds of decline. As farming and settled life became common, people's focus shifted. Resources once devoted to great monuments faded, weakening the old system. Time itself was perceived differently. As people built, harvested, and settled year after year, they developed a stronger, linear sense of past and future, replacing the cyclical rhythm of hunter-gatherer life. Later, smaller, simpler sanctuaries reflect not only fewer resources, but also a loss of collective faith in the old religious order. Simultaneously, a folk religion emerged in homes, represented by small male and female figurines. These humble symbols expressed everyday spirituality, challenging the elite's control. As the monumental cult lost its grip, tension and resistance grew. This unrest reached a breaking point. A carving of a woman giving birth may have become a powerful symbol of renewal and protest. Across the region, monuments were torn down, statues defaced, and sacred symbols destroyed. The great buildings of Sayonu, including the skull building, were burned or dismantled as the people turned against the system that once bound them. The collapse of the Şanlıurfa Tayonu culture ended its monumental power, but not its legacy. The ideas it created, symbolic thinking, organized ritual, social hierarchy, and a new awareness of time, shaped all that followed. Even as the temples fell, the ways of thinking they inspired survived. This collapse was not an end, but a transformation, a step toward new forms of community and self-understanding that would define subsequent human history.